Hello, welcome back to Art House Cinema 8. This week's film is A Woman Under the Influence by independent filmmaker John Cassavetes, starring his amazing wife, actress Jenna Rollins. And as I mentioned in our discussion on Wednesday, it is the most independent art house film I have ever screened in this very long series. And for many of you, it will be your first real independent art house film. We have a lot of other types of films that fall, into that category loosely, and you can go to an art house and see a lot of other different things. For example, the film that we watched last week, which was not in its day an independent film, The Daughter of Shanghai in 1937, but it would qualify as an art house appropriate film these days because it's such an unusual film. Now, also, as I mentioned last week, John Cassavetes is really considered the father of American independent cinema, and it's because he, I guess was the first one to really take that risk. When John Cassavetes started making films, it was a very unusual time in our American cinema, and his contemporaries, other people who were emerging at the same time, were people like Robert Altman and Paul Mazursky and Alan Pakula. So all of these men were very unusual filmmakers, but I would say that Altman and Cassavetes were the most fringe, and Cassavetes even beyond Altman in the risks that he would take in order to put what he wanted on the screen. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of John Cassavetes and Jenna Rollins, because it is a partnership. It is an amazing artistic, creative partnership, and I don't know how far one would have gotten without the other. So it was sort of a marriage that had to happen, and fortunately, it seemed like they enjoyed their marriage while they had it. So let's see. So John Cassavetes, basically the pioneer of American independent cinema, and my clicker's not working. Why? And the interesting thing about Cassavetes, as opposed to maybe Altman or Mazursky or Pakula, is that he also was an actor. And he was an actor because you probably saw Rosemary's Baby, and perhaps you saw The Dirty Dozen. And so he went to school to be an actor, and then he just sort of realized that what he was seeing as far as acting, I don't know, it didn't ignite his passion, right? He thought maybe it wasn't being done the right way, if there is a right way. It wasn't being done the way that satisfied him. So Cassavetes, his early life, he spent his time between Long Island and Greece. That's from where his parents emigrated, and he spent so much time in Greece, actually, that when he came back to the States when he was 7, he couldn't even speak English, so he had to learn English all over again. When he got back to the U.S. and was living in Long Island, he graduated from high school and then spent a small amount of time at a college where he was eventually expelled because of his failing grades. So he then hitchhiked across Florida for a while. It was, I think this is the 50s now, right? So it's sort of the Beat generation. And finally, he decided to apply to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And he really only did that because all of his friends told him that there were tons of girls. He'd meet a chick if he went there. And guess what? He did meet a chick. So he goes to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and he graduates in 1950. But he's still kind of hanging around the school, trying to get projects going and trying to get work. He's getting little bits of work in television, tiny uncredited roles. And then one day, about three years later, he runs into Jen Rollins, who was a young woman from Wisconsin who had graduated from the University of Wisconsin and was now applying, she was auditioning, I should say, to be in the Dramatic Arts Academy. And he saw her and she saw him. And Rollins recollected that moment in an interview years later and said that she was in New York City and she did not want to meet anybody. She did not want to have a relationship. She didn't want to get married because she knew that if she did, she would never become a great actress. And all she wanted was to become a great actress. So she sees John Cassavetes and she says she saw him and thought, oh no. And she said, I tried to avoid him for as long as possible, but he was relentless. So he took a look at her and said, you're for me. And she said, oh my God, fine. And 4 months later, they were married. So now they're married, and so this is now about 1954. Rowlands had graduated from the academy as well, and now they're trying to, make their way as actors. Now, this is a really revolutionary time in acting and in American cinema. And there are a lot of different techniques and styles of storytelling and acting that were starting to burble to the surface. One of the big changes came from people like Paddy Chayefsky, who was a screenwriter, and you would know his work. He wrote Marty, and he wrote Network later on, but he really pioneered this idea of the kitchen sink drama. And he was writing plays for television in this style. And the kitchen sink drama is sort of that very intimate, realistic type of acting. Remember, we've just come from the 40s where everything's oh la 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 la, and it's glam, and it's not very realistic, and there's an affectation to all of the acting. And so now, as we get into the 50s, and Brando, right, Marlon Brando comes along, and that realism, it's changing the way we look at film, the way we look at character. What is character about? And we start becoming much more interested in character as opposed to just the plot of a film or the set of a film or whatnot. It's like you don't think of films like Jezebel or now Voyager as character development films, right? They're just beautiful. And I picked, of course, 2 Bette Davis films, but they're just these gorgeous films and we love them, but there isn't a lot of development. There's not a deep dive into the characters. So now we want something like that. Artists want something like that. And there are 2 styles of acting that are coming to the surface now, and both are very different. One of them comes from Stella Adler, and the other comes from Lee Strasberg. And both of these people studied under the famous Konstantin Stanislavski. All right, he was with the Moscow Theater, and he came over to the States and started teaching everyone this new way of acting. And Stella Adler and Lee Strasberg both took his course, or actually Lee Strasberg didn't ever take the course, but he, I think he studied with other people who were doing the Stanislavski method. So anyway, nonetheless, we have Adler and Strasberg, and they have completely different ideas about what acting is about. Adler believed that actors did not have a large enough emotional repertoire internally that they could only use their past experiences in acting. And Strasberg felt the opposite. So what we have here is sort of the idea of what creates character. And there's this idea of method acting, right? Method acting is Strasberg, which is you take your own personal experiences and you channel them into the character. So if I'm an actor and I'm doing the method, I have to have a scene where my cat is dead. God, why do I pick that? I have to go back in my mind and find the time that my cat was dead, or is that someone died, and then pull those real emotions, that memory of those real emotions, and put them into my character, and then I do it. So like, for example, okay. So there's that. Then Adler is saying, I don't think people have enough of that experiences in them. They have to also use their imagination. They have to just sort of put themselves in a mindset and imagine what it would be like. So these 2 techniques really butted heads, a huge rivalry between Adler and Strasberg. Some people who studied with Adler were Meryl Streep, Marlon Brando, Cloris Leachman, Robert De Niro, Harvey Keitel. People who studied with Strasberg were with affected memory or method acting is Sally Field, Sissy Spacek, Jane Fonda, Joe Clayburgh. So they got good people in both schools. But I remember, just as an aside, that Jane Fonda was talking about her father, Henry Fonda, and he hated the method. And Jane Fonda was, of course, really into it, the Strasberg method. And she had this memory of her dad saying, that's a bunch of like hullabaloo. You just get the script, you imagine what it is, and you act it. And that was Henry Fonda. You just read it, get to the set, and act it, and you do it. And he was great at it. And Fonda was like, no, I need to go internal, I need to go deeper. And Jane Fonda, a great actress too. So who knows which one is better? But these were the rival sort of acting techniques. Now, Cassavetes had even kind of a third type of acting technique. And by the way, he hated the method. He hated Lee Strasberg's school, and he thought that the Actors Studio, which was Lee Strasberg's acting troupe, was just this psychotherapy more than acting. And a lot of people think that, actually. So he thought it was ridiculous, and he even once played a prank on Lee Strasberg and took a friend of his over, and they acted out a scene that they told Strasberg they had written or found, and they actually just improv the entire thing. And Strasberg was impressed, and he asked Cassavetes to join the Actors Studio, and Cassavetes said, no, I'm not joining your acting studio, because if I can fool you that easily, then you're just not very good. So John Cassavetes, not too arrogant, not too confrontational, thought it was garbage. So he said no. So Cassavetes started his own acting school about 1956, and he'd begun teaching this alternative method to method acting with his own workshops. And in his style, character creation was the big thing rather than the backstory or the narrative requirements. So what I just said about moving like from the 40s into the 50s, he was very much a part of this. Just let's explore the character. Who even cares if there's a plot? Who even cares if we're going from A to B to Z? We don't even have to do that. He was very much at the forefront of the cinema verite, which, if you know what that is, it's cinema of truth. True cinema, real life, real things. And a lot of the French New Wave and avant-garde filmmakers were interested in that type of filmmaking. And one of the elements of that would also be to use a lot of non-professional actors, real people in your films, to again try to capture this this reality, right? This not a Hollywood constructed kind of scene or story or character. They wanted it to be as real as possible. So he wanted his actors to create masks, and he wanted them to have in their acting like this kind of expression of joy, even if it was a horrible scene. There should be something organic and this exuberance of feeling coming out of the actor. And the biggest thing that he was into was examining the small feelings in us. And that's kind of funny because in most of Cassavetes' films, people really explode with emotion and they have these really big moments. But he was much more interested in that raw character and examining that. And he very much, instead of being interested in us as the audience getting to know a character, getting in their head and observing them, or just trying to like get internalized with the character, identify with a character, let's say, he wanted us to look at character the way we look at people in real life. And that means no backstory, no information on ambition, motivation, why they're doing what they're doing, how they feel about anything, and just reacting to a character and a story in a film the way you would in real life. So, for example, if we were all in a room together, most of us have known each other a little bit through this program at the university. But let's just say I could become invisible and just plop myself into your house one evening. and I don't know anything about anybody, and you have a whole bunch of people over, and I don't know who's related to whom. I don't know the backstory with anybody. All I'm doing is watching what's happening, right? That's a John Cassavetes film. And so, and it's really hard for American audiences, especially, to get into that a lot of times, because Hollywood has trained us to expect this omniscience, this omniscient point of view, this God's eye, where whether we're reading literature or watching a film or something on television, we usually know why the character's doing what they're doing. We know where they want to go. We know what their, AKA their motivation. We know some of their backstory. We, if someone's really upset and traumatized, we usually get a flashback telling us why. I mean, it's kind of like nothing in American cinema is ever left up to the imagination. They just, and audiences get upset if they aren't told everything. I mean, I watch some of these people on YouTube, these reactors watching older films, and they'll say things like, well, how did they get there? Why are they doing that? And they have all these questions, and it's like, you're not allowed to know. You don't get to know that, and it's on purpose, and you just have to deal with it. You can't know everything. So that is one of the things with a John Cassavetes film, and with the film we're going to see this week, that you're going to have to check yourself, because you will find yourself, number one, maybe your mind is going to wander because the scenes are not full of edits. It's not like scene, cut, cross-cutting montage, all this. It's just filming. And other things that, you're going to think, well, why are they acting this way? How did they meet? How long has this been going on? Who is this person? You don't get to know. Sorry. You don't get to know. All you get to know is what's on the screen, as if you dropped into this couple's home, and you're a ghost, and you're just getting to know them, and that's all you get to know. And that forces us as the viewer to remain very much in the present, as long as you can fight off that conditioning, that brainwashing from Hollywood that we've all had. Just be present. Just get into the story and look at the characters, look at the acting, look at the way it's done. The other thing that's different about a Cassavetes film is the way it's directed. And I just said there's not going to be a lot of edits and things like that, or there'll be edits in strange places. And one of the things you'll notice is that when there's, let's say, a conversation going on between two characters, a lot of times Cassavetes will keep the camera on the person who's reacting instead of the person who's speaking. And we're not used to that. We're used to someone speaks, camera on them. Then maybe we get a camera shot of the reaction, and then we go back to the person who's speaking, and then they're speaking, and then they're speaking, and then they're speaking, and then maybe they're reacting, and then okay, so they're talking, and it's reacting. The other person's talking the whole time talking, and just he stays here. You don't get to see this person, and then maybe he'll cut to them when they're not talking and they're talking, kind of switches it up. I don't know why he does that. He just does that. The other thing that Cassavetes does in his films that a lot of auteur filmmakers do is they use the same actors all the time, like their friends or their family. And Cassavetes and Rollins had to do that because as he was moving through his directing career, they didn't have any money. They had to ask their friends to be in it, ask their close friends to be in it. They have, in the film that we're going to see this week, Cassavetes' real life mother plays Peter Falk's mother, and Jenna Rollins' real mother, Lady Rollins, plays her mother in this film. And one of their children, Alexandra, plays one of their three children in this film. So he likes to do that too. And there's a lot of other people who aren't professional actors and whatnot. So that's the kind of filmmaking that Cassavetes likes. It's very different. And what happened is that once Rollins and Cassavetes both had graduated and they were working a little bit in television and uncredited parts in film, he finally got some money together to make his first film, and it was titled Shadows, and that was in 1959. And it really began as like this improvisational piece from one of his workshops, and he had to ask all of his friends for money in order to produce this. And it was just it was a very interesting, this is like the first really independent film. He wanted to make this story about, he was very anti-Hollywood, even though he worked in Hollywood to get money as an actor. When he made films, he was not at all about Hollywood. And he wanted to make this film, he said, about little people, about modest income people, instead of these Hollywood productions that he felt focused only on wealthy people. And Shadows, in fact, focused on an interracial relationships during that Beat generation in New York City. In particular, it tells the story of three mixed-race siblings living in a bohemian New York at the end of the 1950s. This was shot in an improvisational style, which was his thing. I think if you didn't know this, Robert Altman also did a lot of improvisation on set. Cassavetes also sometimes didn't even have a script. I mean, he would eventually, but if there was a scene and people were going off in their improv and just saying how they felt, he would then just have his secretary write that dialogue to create the script. So he would actually write the script sometimes after the film or the scene had been shot. So he takes this film, Shadows, to Europe, and in 1960 it wins the Critics Award at the Venice Film Festival, and the Europeans love it. It has a European feeling to it, and American distributors are saying, no, we don't know what this is, we don't like it. And so European distributors gave Cassavetes the money, they bought it, and then they distributed his film here as a foreign film, even though it was made here. Americans did not get it. So that was the beginning, and Rollins was in Shadows, but just as a cameo appearance, and so then she returns to mainstream and makes the film Lonely Are the Brave with Kirk Douglas, and then later Tony Rome with Frank Sinatra. Cassavetes goes to television, where he stars in a series titled Johnny Staccato, and he makes guest appearances in series like Rawhide and Dr. Kildare, and all of this, both Rollins and Cassavetes, all of this is with the aim to save the money to make another film. So he makes another film in 1961 titled Too Late Blues. Now this was interesting because it was actually his first major studio film. Paramount said, okay, we saw Shadows, you're interesting, we'll give you a little bit of money, make this other film. So this is a studio production, but still it's very Cassavetes. So Too Late Blues was his follow-up film in 1961. It's the story of jazz musician Ghost Wakefield and his relationships with his band mates and his girlfriend. Starred Bobby Darin in his only or first non-singing role, and Stella Stevens, and I guess it did okay. It wasn't like, you probably never heard of it. It wasn't like a big box office, but he was adept. He could make films, and Paramount said fine. So then he got another film a few years later, A Child is Waiting, in 1964. Now this was with United Artists, so a different studio. And A Child is Waiting was really an interesting idea. The screenplay was written by Abby Mann, who had written Judgment at Nuremberg. And this was going to be a film that took a really serious and exploratory and in-depth look at mental illness in children. It starred Burt Lancaster, who was very much into this because he actually had a child with a disability, and Judy Garland would also be in this film. So the film takes place at a school for mentally challenged children, and Burt Lancaster runs the school, and then Judy Garland is this new teacher who comes in and is kind of awkward and kind of revolutionary, and she's trying to she stirs up trouble unintentionally because she has different ideas about how things should be done. Jenna Rollins is in this film. She plays the mother, the distraught mother of the child, Reuben, who is in focus. He's the main focus of our story. And it's an interesting idea, and Cassavetes actually cast real children with mental disabilities as all the other classmates. So our lead child is just acting, but all the rest of the children actually have disabilities, and he went to each of their parents and explained to them what he was doing and why he was doing it, and had them sign the release. And so, it was all kosher and everything. And so he really wanted that cinema verite. He wanted the realism. He wanted something impactful and hard-hitting. Well, the producer, Stanley Kramer, just didn't get his directing style. They didn't get any of it. And United Artists didn't get it. So they took the film away from him once it was done. I think his name has been removed from it. And they re-edited it and they chopped it up, which is weird. It's hard to do because you'll see how Cassavetes shoots things. And then they stuck all this really kind of cliche background music in different scenes. It doesn't work at all. The film is interesting, and I think you should see it if you haven't sometime. But you'll just see how it's just a mess. So it was very disappointing, and Cassavetes was very upset. And then Stanley Kramer, the producer, was really upset, and he just put out the word to Hollywood that Cassavetes was difficult and told people like just not to work with him. Well, at least to the director. So that was that. Cassavetes goes back to make some more money, and he performs in the film The Dirty Dozen, for which he receives an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. And then he, of course, makes Rosemary's Baby, which is a huge hit. So 2 really big hits, and he makes money. So then he decides to make another film, Faces, in 1968. Cassavetes and Rollins bankrolled this film themselves, and again, they hired their friends as actors. They used their own home as the set, and it is more of this cinema verite style, and it depicts the final stages of the disintegrating marriage of this middle-aged couple, and a bunch of other kind of odd people that are in this scenario in this film. But you can see how different the camera work is. I mean, now, these days, we have so many close-ups and the camera's always in people's faces and we're always chasing people around and following people and tracking people. It actually is the kind of filmmaking that we make a lot now. But back when he was doing it, no one did this. It was static shots, camera. You'd maybe track, of course, when character movement, but you kept things framed properly and you just didn't do any of this. So he was the first. So you can thank him if you like. I think we overdo it now, but anyway, he was the first to do it. The male actors in that film, Seymour Cassel and Lynn Carlin, both received Oscar nominations in Faces, and Cassavetes got an Oscar nomination for the screenplay. So again, he got these really great acknowledgments from Hollywood for a film that was so not Hollywood. It was nothing Hollywood was even interested in. So he'd now proven himself, and he and Rollins would just keep repeating this pattern. They'd go to work, make some money mainstream, then they'd go make a film that they liked that would either open to 20 people, but it would win a bunch of awards, or it would open for one night and then close, or, it would, half the critics would love it and the other half would hate it. I mean, it was just a mixed bag. It didn't matter anymore, though, because everyone knew who Cassavetes was and what he was doing, and it was just like, you know what? He's going to do what he's going to do, and it's always going to be interesting whether you like it or not. So other films that he made in the 1970s, he made Husbands, which was a comedy drama starring Ben Gazzara, Peter Falk, and himself as 3 middle-class men in the throes of a midlife crisis after one of their friends dies. And then what else did he make? Then he made Minnie and Moskowitz in 1971. This is again with Seymour Cassel and Jenna Rollins, and was sort of a play off those screwball comedies of the 30s where, the woman is very refined and kind of more upper class, and then the guy is kind of like a screwball weirdo, and they're just completely mismatched, and then they find out that actually they're perfect together. It was sort of loosely based on Cassavetes' relationship with Rollins, because in his mind anyway, he thought of her as this beautiful, classy gal, and then he was kind of this scruffy, dark, short guy. So whatever. But Minnie Moskowitz is really fun. And also in real life, Roland's mother did beg her not to marry John Cassavetes, but that was back in 1953. Now we're in the 70s, baby. So then in 1974, they get together for A Woman Under the Influence, which is our film. And it's his masterpiece. It's the best thing he ever did. Both of them probably ever did. And it did prove that Jenna Rollins was a great actress. Just like she'd wanted to be, everybody thought, yep, you are. And Cassavetes became an icon after this film. The film came about, he was inspired to write it when Rollins had actually expressed to him a desire to appear in a play about the difficulties that contemporary women faced in life. And then when he completed the script, she realized that it was so intense and emotional that she knew she would never be able to perform that 8 times a week. So then he thought, okay, I'll turn it into a screenplay. And he took it around to Hollywood trying to get money for it. And everyone basically said, no one wants to see a crazy middle-aged dame. So he's always writing about middle-aged people, right? Because he reflects on it. But he was interested in women, just like Mazursky and Pakula and Altman, very interested in women, which was, a cool thing in the 70s. They wanted to see women who weren't glamorous and made up all the time. They wanted to see the real nitty gritty. So it was an interesting time for character development, especially for females as well. So he takes the script to his friend Peter Falk, who liked it so much he actually invested $500,000 of his own money into it. Then the Cassavetes mortgaged their home, and they grabbed some students from the American Film Institute, where Cassavetes was serving as the first filmmaker in residence. So he got students to work on this thing, and they just found this house on Hollywood Boulevard and just piled everybody into it. So it was very interesting. Once they completed the film, Cassavetes could not find anyone who would distribute it. It was just so unusual. It was so different. Nobody thought that anyone would come see it. So basically, Cassavetes went around to all of the theaters and asked the theater owners themselves if they would please screen the film. So it was the first time in the history of motion pictures that an independent film was distributed without the use of a nationwide system of sub-distributors. Kind of a hard word to say when you've been talking a long time. So the art houses showed it. He took it to festivals. It started getting talked about. People started really getting into it. And then Richard Dreyfuss went on the Mike Douglas show. Peter Falk was the other guest. And Dreyfuss described the film, A Woman Under the Influence, as, quote, the most incredible, disturbing, scary, brilliant, dark, sad, depressing movie he'd ever seen. And he said, I went crazy. I went home and vomited. And this prompted curious audiences to seek out the film, any film capable of making Richard Dreyfuss vomit. But I think what he meant was Richard Dreyfuss is bipolar. And I think that when he saw this film, he saw reflections of himself up there. Now, that said, Cassavetes is not making a statement in this film about mental illness or by being bipolar or anything. He's just showing you a couple, and he never tells us what the problem is. And we can speculate on that and guess, and people always do that. But the point is, it doesn't matter. That's not what it's about. It's about their relationship. It's about how these two people make it work in the weirdest way, the heartbreaking way, but it still works because they love each other. So, whatever they have, they have. I think that's it. I think I've told you everything. So again, it's not about how we watch ourselves, but how we watch other people. You're not going to get any backstory. And I guess just to follow it up, after he made this film, they still kept going back and forth, he and Rollins, making mainstream films and whatnot. But there was one other, wanted to tell you something. Oh, well, I should tell you. Woman Under the Influence, Gena Rowlands, nominated for an Oscar for Best Actress, and John Cassavetes nominated as Best Director. And neither of them won, but it really, again, it was the thing that put them on the map. Right after that, they both appeared in 2 Minute Warning, which was one of those kind of disaster films. This was about a sniper at the Super Bowl shooting people. Nice. And then Cassavetes made the neo-noir crime film, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. And in 1980, they teamed up, Cassavetes and Rowlands, for one of my favorite films, Gloria. And that's the first film I ever saw of his. And it was the first time I ever saw Jenna Rollins. I was like 10 when that came out, and I just loved it. And it was one of those that we, taped on the VCR, and I watched over and over and over again. And it's his most mainstream film. It's his most accessible film. So even if you decide that A Woman Under the Influence is not for you, and it may not be your cup of tea, you still, I think, will enjoy Gloria because it's a little bit more, more structured, and it's brilliant. Now, don't watch the Gloria remake with Sharon Stone. I love Sharon Stone, but just no, don't do that. Watch the one with Jenna Rollins from 1980. That's terrific. And in Gloria, Jenna Rollins was also nominated for an Oscar for that role. Didn't win that one either. Sissy Spacek got it for Coal Miner's Daughter. Whatever. I mean, she was great, but come on, Jenna Rollins never got an Oscar. She needs an Oscar. Too late now, I guess, because she's 90 years old. Jenna Rollins is 90 years old. She's still kicking. John Cassavetes unfortunately died in 1989 at the age of 59 from cirrhosis of the liver. And then Jenna Rollins got remarried in 2012 to a man named Robert Forrest and lived happily ever after with him. And their 3 kids did great. Nick Cassavetes is a director. He directed a film that probably many of you have seen called The Notebook. And I'm sorry, but he hates that film, and he so regrets doing that because it's very mainstream. Even though I think Jenna Rollins is in it, right? And he's just like, oh, why did I do that? So he's tried to carve out a independent career for himself and not done great with it. And then Zoe Cassavetes wrote and directed a film titled Broken English in 2007, which was also okay. But whatever. They're all doing their own thing. It's a creative family. And Jenna Rollins is just hanging in there, doing her thing, and has this amazing legacy behind her. So I hope that you enjoy Woman Under the Influence. It's 2.5 hours long, and just try to keep yourself from placing some kind of frame on it that you've been taught, because there is no right way to make a film. We just have been conditioned to expect certain things. So you're not going to get them in this. And it's probably going to be really good for you. So enjoy Jenna Rollins in a tour de force in John Cassavetes' film, A Woman Under the Influence. I'll talk to you about it next week. Bye.